Like and follow if you love horror. 12 feet to the light cage, nothing to stand on, no stepladder. Our Vic is not what I'd call athletic. Then there's this. Ronnie produced a phone and accessed Inquisitor. Footage from the bank surveillance showed a man, bald, glasses, overweight, early 50s, frantically running from screen to screen. Then, in the same sequence, screen to screen, the footage fizzled out, distorted, then faded back in. You can't see it too clearly, but a humanoid figure appears in the white noise of every screen. He punched something into Inquisitor. A light blue aura illuminated on the screen in the shape of a figure. What sort of UP can systematically affect electronic systems like this? Diana asked. Dozens. Even a human mage can perform all these acts fairly easily, he replied. It doesn't leave us a lot to work with. She thought about it. The only real lead we have is the toy from the safety deposit box. We'll have to interview the staff, and while we're at it, might as well talk to the friends, neighbors, and family for some background on the manager. Joe, Jack, and Miranda are already on site. Might as well move on to the friends, neighbors, and family shtick. Ronnie gestured for the exit. Diana obliged. It was a few hours to San Antonio, where the Vic was discovered, but Diana's class had been early enough that by the time they arrived, they wouldn't be interrupting people's dinners. Cruisers were parked at each corner of the block, and a few uniformed city police, or unis as the team referred to them, congregated in front of the house. Ronnie and Diana first made their way to the recently widowed Miss Lang to get some perspective on the man's life. At any point did your husband seem like he was nervous, cautious, easily agitated? Anything that might seem like unusual behavior to break from the routine? Diana's usual monotone was actually perfect for witness interview, especially when they were stressed, and over time she'd learned to avoid certain subjects or phrases that they might find upsetting. No, nothing. Miss Lang's cheeks were already red and puffy. Her graying blonde hair a frazzled mess. She teared up between pauses of breath, needing a moment to compose herself before she spoke again. Harold was such a predictable man, and terrible at surprises. Anything out of the ordinary would have stuck out like a sore thumb. Did he mention anything unusual that stands out? Something like the usual work banter that might seem peculiar? Ronnie added. He was a little more forceful, but also understood the subtleties of witness interviews like this. Maybe a customer that seemed particularly angry over a transaction? Oh, there were always those sorts, she sniffled. Harold had his life threatened more than once in his career. People always got so sensitive over money. But they were just blowing off steam. No one ever tried anything rash. During work chats, did a deposit box with an antique toy ever come up? Diana hoped such a thing might stick out in conversation. Well, yes, once. Her face pinched up, a tear falling along the creases of her crow's feet around her eyes. Harold had to work with a probate judge on an estate claim for an antique toy cap gun from the Lone Ranger. He'd fallen in love with the thing. It reminded him of his childhood. He said it was one of a kind. A collector had deposited it, then vanished. Eventually he was pronounced in absentia. Harold jumped at the chance to own it. He just had to get it out of auction before someone showed up to claim it. Ma'am, did your husband mention the name of the collector? Ronnie probed deeper, hoping they might have a break. Oh, I'm sure he did. The idea that the information might help, but she couldn't remember it, flustered her deeply, and she broke into heaving sobs. But, I can't remember. I'm so sorry, but it was just a toy, and I was just conversation. I didn't think it would be important at the time. For that moment, it was pretty clear they wouldn't be getting any more out of Mrs. Lang. Ronnie and Diana gave the grieving woman their deepest and sincerest condolences, then departed. They moved on to a few close neighbors, some of whom were familiar with the Langs. The couple was well known and well liked. A few mild disagreements and grievances came to light, but nothing beyond barking dogs and seasonal foliage collection. Having collected what little they could, all that stood out was was what Mrs. Lang recalled about the antique collectible cap gun. It gave them more than she knew. It was one of a kind, extremely rare, and therefore traceable. Nothing like that would disappear easily. Even still, nothing connected Harold to the bank man. Even still, nothing connected Harold the bank manager to the cap gun other than his time with the probate judge. We may have to consider that Harold Lang was an unintended casualty, Diana said, more thinking out loud than calling for a discussion. It's possible the bank manager wasn't a target, but just in the way of the UP coming to collect his cap gun. God damn, I am sorry. Can't stop burping. It places the toy in a safety deposit box, assume it's good, finds out it's been declared in absentia, gets mad, kills poor old Herbert, collects the gun and leaves. Harold, Diana corrected. It doesn't tell us much about what we're dealing with, but if Harold contacted a probate judge, there would be records. Records will lead to an estate. The estate might have a statement for where the toy was purchased and have been. Hopefully the estate won't have too much art. It's possible that a thing like at one time, the one-of-a-kind Lone Ranger cap gun is what one would call a prized possession. Maybe the UP is a former human? That might be why they disappeared and were declared in absentia. You've been reading my profiles. Diana was excited by Ronnie's little hint. Unfortunately, there are too many case files suggesting that non-human UPs collect things of value, and more often, seemingly mundane things like toys. Mundane? Ronnie pretended to be offended, wondering if Diana could tell the difference. We're talking about the prototype of an original run of the Lone Ranger cap gun. This was the very cap gun they were modeled. This was the very cap gun they were modeled on. I'm sorry, I didn't realize you were close to... Diana struggled to understand what was happening. I'm just messing with you, Ronnie chuckled. I appreciate Mr. Silverheels for representing real natives in the old black and whites, but I spent my whole life with some pasty-faced asshole expecting me to play their plucky Injun sidekick. Didn't stop when I joined the Bureau. Can't tell you how many times one of my partners called me Tonto. Now I am sorry. Diana understood exactly what that was. While her social awkwardness caused her to miss a lot of the times another agent or superior was being sexist or racist, some of them would go out of their way to make sure she knew. I know you get it. Ronnie quickly changed the subject. Let's go link up with Miranda, and then we'll reach out to the probate judge. Miranda Murdoch closed her eyes and sniffed the air of the dark, drab bank vault. The electric sting of chemical cleaners and metal polish, the ever-present pungent mustiness of cold excrement and urine, that odd lingering of decay from dead bodies. But there was something else she couldn't quite latch her senses onto. The animal instinct deep in her core told her something was off. It nagged at her. Forensics turned up no prints, no tracks, no fibers, nothing but what was left of the dead body. Her senses of smell, hearing, sight, touch, as heightened as they were, picked up nothing that might have been missed. For a crime scene with a dead body, it was unnaturally clean. But there was something else there. She knew it. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. She had the feeling she was being watched. Then the southern drawl of her subordinate pulled her from her trance. "Oh, now, come here, bring it in." Joe Jack held his arms open, notebook and pen held in one hand. The young teller he was gesturing towards was crying and distressed, and though she looked at him oddly, she might have got the sense of comfort from the gesture, and she let the scrawny, unkempt southerner hug her. "That's right, let it all out," he added, rocking the teller lightly. "You're safe here from the boogeyman. What ganked your boss?" Miranda pinched her temples, fighting off the usual Joe Jack-inspired headache. The boy meant well, but this was the part that made it evident he had slid through the FBI training program because her UPD desperately needed a hedge mage. She turned back around to refocus on the vault, let her subordinate